Thank you guys for all joining the lecture today about hunger. I'm going to introduce myself. I am Lorraine Schuler. I am the president of Spiritual Life Council here on campus. I just want to welcome everyone to this lecture. I do want to just tell everyone that we will be recording this, just so you're aware. And one of the reasons that I was asked to welcome you guys is because today is International Women's Day. And it's really important that we all look back at so many women who have changed the world forever, some including Ruth Ginsburg, Eleanor Roosevelt, Rosa Parks, Susan B. Anthony are just a few who have fought so hard for change. So many women have stood up to try to change the world, and one aspect of that is hunger. And we're going to be hearing from Nancy Neal, who's going to talk about how we today in this world are fighting for hunger. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Phil to introduce her.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Phil Reardon. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs here at Elmhurst. So it's my privilege to introduce Nancy Neal. And I had the honor of meeting Nancy a couple of years now when she hosted a group of us when we were in DC visiting the African American History Museum. So here's a little bit about Nancy. She's the Director of Church Relations Department at Bread for the World and has been a leader in the organization's effort towards racial equality. She began serving Bread for the World in 2011 as Associate for Denominational Women's Organization Relations. Working with leaders of denominational women's organizations, she engaged their members in a campaign to improve nutrition for women and children around the world. From there, she served as Deputy Director of the Church Relations Department. Before living in Washington, D.C., Nancy lived in New York City for 13 years, where she became an adult. Those must be your writings. Completed a Master of Divinity at Union Theological Seminary and managed book projects through the editorial and production process at the Crossroad Publishing Company. Nancy was born in Virginia, spent most of her childhood in Charleston, South Carolina, and later attended Clemson University in South Carolina. Nancy's been on our campus, so she is familiar with the surroundings. And so it's my pleasure to welcome Nancy back, even if it's virtually, to Elmhurst University. Nancy?
I just want to say it's a privilege to be here with you, even if virtually. This technology, while I think we get Zoom fatigue easily, we're growing accustomed to it, and it allows us to do all kinds of things that we aren't normally able to do. So, and to bring more voices into the room. So I'm really glad to be here with you. And I want to thank Scott, my dear friend, Scott Matheny, for inviting me. And to thank you, Dr. Phil and Lorraine, of course, for hosting me, and to Chris and Melissa and Desiree and Bernice for hosting me and making this happen. It is really just a privilege to be here with you. I want to start by telling you a story. You may have seen this story floating around social media, which is where I found it. But last December, a third grade teacher in Monmouth, New Jersey, was teaching her class on a Zoom platform, much like we're in right now. And she noticed that one of her students was fidgeting and really just not paying attention. So the teacher urged the girl to pay attention, and I can imagine this happened a couple of times before the girl broke down sobbing in her class. And she shared with everyone, the story says she confessed to everyone that she was hungry and their family didn't have enough food. You see, her mother lost her restaurant jobs when everything was shut down during the pandemic, and she didn't qualify for unemployment. So she was trying to, like many, to cobble together work to be able to feed her family and to keep a roof over their heads. And this left her family food insecure, meaning that they weren't always sure when the next meal would come and that they would have 3 meals a day. They joined 24 million adults and 17 million children in our country who face food insecurity each day. But it meant that this little girl was so hungry that she could hardly pay attention in class. And this was one of those feel-good stories where the teacher calls the guidance counselor who calls the food bank, and they get groceries to the house immediately, and the mom gets the assistance that she needs. So there are a couple things to note about this story. The first is that female-headed households are more vulnerable to hunger and poverty. And when you introduce race into that equation, the numbers of women of color-headed households are even higher, and women of color-headed households are more vulnerable to hunger. The second thing to note is this language around confession. There was this idea that it was something shameful to share that this little girl was experiencing hunger, and I think it comes from this culture, this notion of in our culture that being poor is shameful, and we blame poor people for being poor. And so I just wanted to note that little hint in there. And the other thing to note is the invisibility of public policy in the situation. It's kind of the elephant in the room. It's a thing that's not talked about, although public policy services are referenced. So before the pandemic, when families can't afford food, students get access to free and reduced price breakfasts and lunches at school. A federal program that ensures that children have enough to eat so they're able to focus in their classes and learn. In the summer months when school is out, families have access to summer meals programs. But that summer meals program has been extremely underutilized in part because sometimes it's just hard for families to get to the distribution sites to pick up the food for their kids. And maybe they don't have a lot of time, or if they're working multiple jobs, or they don't have access to transportation to get there. So just before the pandemic, Bread for the World was working with members of Congress to write legislation that would allow parents to receive electronic benefits transfer cards, or EBT cards, for the summer so that they could buy more groceries from the grocery store instead of having to go pick up food from these particular locations. When the pandemic hit, it was clear that students were not going to be in school and they weren't going to be able to receive school meals. And so we pivoted our advocacy work to push for a program called Pandemic EBT. And that would give parents an EBT card with cash on it to purchase extra groceries for their children in place of the school meals programs. You will remember that the president is signing into law this week the American Rescue Act. When we learned that the bill would include changes to the child tax credit, we got to work engaging churches and activists, particularly in states with moderate Democratic senators, to push for support of that part of the bill. You see, the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit allow low-income working families to receive larger tax refunds. The program is set up so that it benefits working people. The more you work, the more of a refund you receive, up to a certain income level. The child tax credit is similar in that the more you work, the greater the refund you receive. There are a couple key changes to that program introduced in this bill that was passed in the Senate over the weekend. The first is that the amount per child has increased from $2,000 to $3,600 for kids under 6 and to $3,000 for kids between 7 and 17. The money is also distributed monthly instead of in one lump sum. So parents receive $300 a month for younger children and $250 a month for older children. And instead of having the benefit scale up based on income, all families in low and middle income brackets would receive the same benefits. There wouldn't be changes or reductions to those. The impact of this change in the tax code would cut child poverty to nearly half. I mean, it's huge. It would cut child poverty nearly in half. It would have significant impact on hunger, particularly during the pandemic when 1 in 7 families with children are food insecure. And not only does this help children, but it puts money back into the economy. And when children get enough of the right kinds of food, they learn better. They become more productive workers as adults, and they're healthier throughout their lives. This reduces the burdens on the healthcare system. It just generally improves the economy and is just a really strong investment. And another interesting thing to note is that when families are in the midst of financial hardships, domestic violence increases. And so this extra cash can lead to reducing violence, particularly against women in homes. And while this program is critical and it will make a tremendous impact in this 1 year, it's not a permanent program. And it's not the only solution to ending hunger in the US, and it doesn't even address issues of hunger around the world. So we will push to make this program permanent, but we're thinking bigger. We have a larger goal though. We believe it is possible to end hunger in the world. It is a goal established by the United Nations in the Sustainable Development Goals. These 17 universal goals call for an end to hunger, among other things. But the pandemic and the previous administration have set the world back in the global push to end hunger and to work for equality for women, to address transportation issues, to address water and sanitation issues around the world. The pandemic has unveiled so many structural issues in our country, and with a new administration with bold goals coming into office, there's an appetite for casting a broader vision, for addressing institutional causes of hunger here in the US and around the world. As we were casting this vision, we remembered our founding of Bread for the World in 1974. Art Simon was a pastor on the Lower East Side of New York City. It was part of town known for housing or not housing, in some cases, some of the poorest people in the city. Reverend Simon's heart broke every day when he would visit the members of his congregation and see their struggles to put food on their tables. And so he and clergy friends from around the country formed a Christian citizens movement calling for public policy solutions to end the hunger crisis faced by families around him and across the country. And one of the first actions they took was to call on Congress to pass a right to food resolution. They believed that every person in the world has a right to food, and that the federal government has a role in ensuring that the people in this country and around the world have enough of the right kinds of food, not just to survive, but to thrive. And so they pushed this resolution through Congress by engaging churches and community leaders around the country to push their own senators and representatives to pass such a resolution. In the midst of the pandemic, we think it's time for the US government to make a renewed, bold commitment to put us back on track to end hunger. We have put together a platform that lays out 4 broad areas of policy work that are critical for our time. The first is to address food systems. We saw moments during this pandemic where the food system was in crisis. When workers in meatpacking plants were getting sick with COVID, there was deep concern that the industry would shut down. And while it didn't completely shut down, we never didn't have any meat, a lot of workers got sick just to keep the food system going. Our food system is the journey our food takes from the farm to our forks. It includes farmers and ranchers, workers on those farms and ranches, processing plants, transportation systems and warehouse systems and grocery stores and restaurants, and the workers in all of these industries. The food system is really a complex group of interrelated systems in this country, but also around the world. And so we need to change our food systems to make them more equitable, to provide good food, nutritious food to everyone. The second body of policies is around climate change. Climate change is exacerbated by our food system. Think of pig farms and the gases emitted that are bad for the air, for the atmosphere. And think of the energy it takes to produce a cow. But climate change also increases hunger, particularly for smallholder farmers around the world who struggle to feed their families and to get crops to market because of droughts or unseasonal rains or infrastructure issues brought about by extreme weather. And this is not to mention the challenges in the aftermath of extreme weather of getting food to people and getting money to people to purchase food. You can imagine after Hurricane Katrina how difficult it was to get food to the people and water to the people in the Superdome. You can imagine, after the wildfires in California, how it would shut down the food system. The third body of policy is around race and gender equity. And as I mentioned before, female-headed households are much more likely to face hunger than other families. And add in race and you see greater impact on women of color-headed households. The impacts of climate change are disproportionately felt by communities of color. The pandemic has disproportionately impacted communities of color. That's lack of access to healthy foods, which leads to health challenges that create disproportionate impacts on communities of color. So you see higher death rates from COVID-19 based on age, and you see different people are treated differently in the healthcare system because of color of their skin. And so there's a number of layers of the ways that the pandemic in particular, but the way that our systems are structured that cause that just the pandemic just exacerbated all of those issues and just brought them into the light in ways we hadn't seen so clearly and so boldly before. The final area that we want to put forth is around economic justice. We believe that good paying work is the best way to address hunger. Raising the minimum wage would have a huge impact, not just on minimum wage workers, but as the salaries rise in a company, they would have to raise salaries across the board to keep people in their stratus of pay. And then creating a legal pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants will have a positive impact by just enforcing the floor of the minimum wage so that all workers are starting from the same place. It allows workers to be able to speak up about illegal practices in their work environments. And it also just gives people dignity and gives people the dignity to be able to make their own decisions about their housing, their food, and just gives people more freedom to move about and to more agency in their lives. With this agenda, we as Bread for the World are convening the faith community to push the federal government to make getting us back on track to end hunger and poverty a priority. We will partner with faith leaders to urge the White House to develop a plan. We are asking the White House to convene a meeting of national faith leaders to be in conversation about what are the pieces of that plan. And we'll also push Congress to support such a plan that would get us back on track to end hunger. And we do this understanding that there are particular opportunities to move this agenda forward, even without a big federal government commitment, which we hope will happen. But the policies like the child tax credit, the Farm Bill will come up soon, and the Farm Bill impacts the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. It affects the way that farmers are able to produce crops. It affects our international development assistance. It just has these big impacts. Other policies that are coming forth will be around the Women, Infants, and Children's Program, the child nutrition reauthorization of these the school meals that we talked about earlier. All of those bills will be coming up, and we'll be able to put this lens of economic justice and climate change and food systems and race and gender equity. Just use those filters as we work for those policies. So I want to take a quick break. I think Dr. Phil has a couple questions, so I want to respond to him.
Yeah, so let me start off by saying if any of you have any questions for Nancy, please use the chat area and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So Nancy, the first question is, why is this work so important to you?
Mm-hmm. For me, and for those of us at Bread for the World, the root of this work is our faith. In Jesus' last meal with his disciples, he shares the new covenant that is made between God and God's people at a meal. That conversation is at a table, and the symbols of that covenant are bread and wine, and those are the symbols that we use to remember that covenant with God. Secondly, Jesus is crucified because his ministry interrupts the arrangements that the Jewish authorities have with the Roman Empire. It's political. It's about speaking the truth of Jesus' faith and the ways that the authorities have twisted the faith to fit carefully within the structures of empire. Jesus' ministry is also tangible. It's physical. It's about bodies that are excluded being brought back into community. People are outcast because they are possessed by demons, or because they have contagious skin diseases, or their continued menstrual bleeding, or their status as a tax collector for the Roman Empire, or because they've been married multiple times. And finally, when Jesus is surrounded by 5,000 men and presumably thousands of women and children too, after teaching all day, and it gets late and the crowd gets hungry, the disciples want to send the people away. And what does Jesus say? He says, you give them something to eat. Food is at the heart of our Christian faith. And so for me, the faith is political. And so it's engaging in feeding people through policy actions of our government, federal and local governments.
So Nancy, how can people help, whether it's through political advocacy, whether it is, boots on the ground? What could our students and our guests that are listening to you today, what can they do to help?
I think there's an important role for charity. There's a reason that the food banks are the center of the story, but I think having a broader understanding that we are not able to food bank or food pantry or soup kitchen our way out of hunger. Volunteering will not be enough to really meet the needs of families around the country and in our communities. Ultimately, our goal in working with people around the country is to help you create relationships with your members of Congress, and it's important to create relationships with your elected officials at all levels. You want to figure out, even if hunger is not your issue, you want to figure out the issue that is the most important to you. What moves your heart? What is at the root of your faith? What is at the root of your values? Obviously, hunger is an issue that I care about. But then once you pick an issue, learn about it and how it impacts you and your school and your town, your state, and learn about the solutions and the challenges faced by your community. And then write letters, send messages on social media, and spread the word about these issues. Visit your members of Congress maybe when you come to DC next time. And if you align yourself with an organization like Bread for the World, or there are other organizations as well, you can multiply your impact. Other people around the country or around your community are engaging in these broader strategies to have a bigger impact. We have organizers around the country who support churches and activists in implementing regional strategies that are targeted to particular members of Congress because of their influence on policies. And they recently convened a group of students in a conversation about developing some strategies for college campuses. So if you're interested in getting involved in that work with other college students around the country, let me know. I can connect you with your regional organizer. Zach Schmidt lives in Chicago, and I think he would be a great resource for you all. So I'm happy to share his information or to connect you directly if you're interested.
I think that resource would be incredibly valuable. We are a microcosm of the Chicagoland community, and we have students that have food insecurity, have housing insecurity. Many families in our community don't know where their next hot meal is going to come from, and so I think all that information that you could provide for us would be incredibly helpful. While I think we do the best we can in trying to reach out and help students with food or work with a local food pantry. I think there's always more we can do. So if you have any other comments that you'd like to make on that, we'd certainly be open to hearing them.
Yeah, I can share a couple of resources that that you might find interesting. Let me share my screen really quick. I think that'll work. So a couple things here, and the first is our offering of letters resource. So we, every year, we invite churches and student groups to write letters to their members of Congress about hunger issues. And so this is the web page that is the resource for that. It has sort of a step-by-step, there's some facts and some pictures and some sort of steps to putting together a letter writing event. And we call it an offering of letters because we think about the worship on Sunday morning has this time of offering, and we offer our time, our talent, and our treasure. But we offer our stewardship and our influence on members of Congress as well. And so we write letters and we invite people to pray over the letters and pray for members of Congress and then send those letters off. So this website has some resources here. You can connect with there's some particular pieces. There's some stuff about farm food systems, some stories of impact here that you might find interesting. And then somewhere up here is all of our regional organizers. I think if I go, here you go. So there are folks around the country here to help you write letters and to, just figure out what this stuff is all about. You can sort it by state. So Illinois is, here's Zach. I put his email address in the chat. So there's that. There's two things that I think this is a super resource. It's the Racial Wealth Gap Learning Simulation. And so what this does is walks through a number of policy decisions that the US government has made that has created not just an income gap, but a wealth gap. And you think of wealth as like all of your assets minus your debts is what you have your wealth. So it's your house that you have, it is the thing, the money you have in the bank. And so there's a huge wealth gap. I don't know what the statistics are now, but they were like 1 to 11 white people have across the board have 11 times the wealth of Black people. So this is a really cool tool to help you understand, 11 key policies that have contributed to that wealth gap. It has sort of a game sort of feel to it where it's kind of like Monopoly. There's some money and there's some opportunities and you get an identity and you read from different cards. This is a great resource. I would encourage you to take a look at it and just run it in a group. This is another really important resource, Racially Equitable Responses to Hunger During COVID-19. So it's a report that we've done about racial equity and our COVID-19 responses. And then we just have a number of fact sheets. There we go. There's a fact sheet on expanding the child tax credit. So if you have questions about particular policies, we can help you find fact sheets and things to learn more. This is our coronavirus page, and just a news story. So I'm gonna stop sharing now. So if you have any questions or resources, I'm happy to send you some things. Put any of these in the chat that you're interested in.
So why don't we open it up and see if anybody has any questions for Nancy. Please feel free to use the chat, or I think if you unmute yourself, you can also ask the question directly. So we'll take a moment to see if anybody's got a question. Looks like everybody's quiet this afternoon. So Nancy, do you have any last minute advice? Anything you would want to share with us that you haven't discussed or talked about that we at Elmhurst could be doing to try to make an impact on the food shortage that many people are experiencing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I think one of the most important things is figuring out your story and what is and what are, you know, how does this relate to your life? How does this relate to the life of your community? And connecting this with a broader narrative of what's happening in our country and around the world, and just figuring out for you what is really important about this is a really good place to start. Just thinking about your future and what you know, if you're interested in hunger, great. You know, we have internships at Bread if you're interested in things like that. We've been doing a lot of virtual kinds of internships. I know that's always a question for students. And if you want to get involved, we have a student group. And if you just want to talk to folks who are doing interesting policy work, you know, you can always reach out to me. I can find, there's a lot of staff at Bread doing a lot of different interesting things. We have a government relations team of folks who are connecting with members of Congress every day. We have organizers who are in the field connecting with local leaders and churches and student groups. We have my team is working with churches across the country, national churches and local churches. And we have a public policy group that is doing analysis on these issues every day and writing the papers that we have on our website. And so if you have interest in any of these aspects of the work, we also have a membership and development team. So if you're interested in a career in fundraising, like, I'm happy to connect you with folks who are doing the things that you're interested in. If you wanted to do a phone call or a you know, meeting to learn more, informational meeting.
So it looks like we have a question.
Okay.
What do you view as root causes to hunger, and how can we as a country sustainably address those root causes?
Yeah. You know, I think the causes of hunger that we've really identified as the most critical to address we see as climate change and the food system, climate change, race and gender equity, economic justice, and is that 4? I think that's 4. Those are the 4 anchors. Immigration ties into that too. Migration is certainly a challenge. And so I think we would see those as the biggest sort of subject causes of hunger. At the root, though, you just have structural issues of racism and sexism and heterosexism and inequities in our culture. And so trying to address the hunger issues through hunger policy issues with those lenses of equity, I think is the way that we're trying to work to address hunger the most. Yeah. Are there any particular issues that you're wondering about? I just wonder if the person who asked the question.
No, nothing specifically. Just curious about how you thought about root issues.
Right.
But your answer was clear.
Yeah. I mean, and I think if it wasn't clear, we certainly have we work on both domestic and global hunger. And so those look a little bit different depending on where you are. But they're, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals, which followed 15 years of Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals ran from 1985, what was it? Yeah, 85 to 2000. 2000 to 2015. Yeah, 2000 to 2015, I'm getting old. Those goals were really focused on bringing the world together to address development in low-income countries, in trying to focus on where there was the most poverty and hunger and challenges. But the Sustainable Development Goals that started in 2015 and run through 2030, these UN adopted goals, the world has kind of signed off on these goals, are universal. And so they apply to quote unquote developing countries, middle income countries, and then developed higher income countries of like the United States. And so recognizing that there's all these challenges in all of our countries. So in that frame of understanding the Sustainable Development Goals as universal, we have been trying to talk about our work in a sort of more universal fashion. But we have worked on addressing challenges in development assistance. We have long pushed for country-led development that is really tied to people on the ground and not just running through different governments, and trying to address really critical issues within development, even the critiquing the structure of the way that development assistance is thought of as this sort of handout charity kind of work. In the last administration, one of the good things that came out of the administration was that there was an effort to make the think about how the countries are developing capacity so that they're not dependent on development assistance forever and ever and ever, which was a welcome change. And we do a lot of fighting for the safety net programs in our country, but really trying to shift and focus more on economic justice and identifying ways of ending hunger that are not just safety net programs, because it's important to have a safety net. We also want people to have the dignity of work and to be able to provide for themselves and their communities, and have the agency to do that. Maybe more than you were looking for.
Nancy, we have two more questions. The first is, can you explain domestic hunger?
Okay. So when we talk about domestic hunger, we're talking about food security, which is making sure that people have access to food, to the right kinds of food, and to have food, 3 meals a day, kind of the sort of 3 square meals a day. When we talk about people who face hunger or food insecurity, it means that through the course of the year, there will be times or seasons when they will not have enough food to eat. And so parents sometimes skip meals so that their children can eat. In the case of the little girl I talked about at the beginning, they didn't even have enough to have the children have all regular meals. And so so really when we're talking about hunger, we're talking about people who go through seasons when they're not sure that they will have 3 meals a day, and they're not sure where all their meals will come from. I think when we think of hunger, we think a lot of times we think of people not getting enough calories. One of the challenges right now is also the people getting the wrong calories. And so they're getting a lot of empty calories, which causes obesity and other non-communicable diseases like diabetes and heart disease and things like that. And so one aspect of hunger that we're seeing is that people are not getting enough nutrients. And so we would count that also in hunger. Is that the answer that you're looking for? Is that clear?
I think it's also interesting that people have this myth about who goes hungry. So when I was living in Palm Beach County, Florida, before coming here, a very wealthy community, over 100,000 people every day didn't know where their next meal was coming from. And so it affects all communities equally. Here's our next question. Many studies show that a plant-based diet is better for health, the climate crisis, animal welfare, and efficient use of resources to provide the most food possible. Does your work address this?
I think some of our research support, like some of our some of our work does. We have not moved into the, like, it's been part of the discussions of the issues and the solutions. It has not specifically been part of any policy advocacy work that we've done on Capitol Hill. I don't know if that makes sense. So we regularly, we used to every year, but are waiting. We're going to use this current hunger report. It's a report that we do that sort of outlines policy issues. The last one is about food systems and includes a chapter about climate change. And so I think there's a tool that we've worked on that is sort of a food challenge that encourages people to sort of eat lower on the food chain and focus on more plant-based diet. We have not incorporated any of that thinking into any of the policies that we've been advocating for quite yet. And then I probably, if you go to hungerreport.org, I'll put it in the chat. You'll see it. Is where that report is.
So, Bobby, I think you would like to comment on the role of advocacy.
Oh, I'm Bobby Dowderman, and I happen to be an alum of Elmhurst College, believe it or not. And I have been a member and been active with Bread World over 40 years. New Art Simon in Illinois. I served on the board of Bread for the World in early days, and I've been to Washington quite a bit, and I really, I learned Advocacy 101 with my experience with Bread for the World, and so I have seen the organization grow. Nancy, you have given us so much information today, and a lot of what you were talking about today was really not recognized or out there in our policies and what we're doing today. Early on, the issue that I worked on a lot was WIC, Women, Infants, and Children program, which Bread for the World, that's our domestic program there. What I wanted to say is how important it is to take up advocacy if you're going to visit your congressman, if you're going to write letters, if you're going to do social media. That really helps move the needle in terms of funding and support for these programs that we're talking about. And I will say over the years, I can't tell you how many Congress people I've had. I live in California now, but between changeovers in senators and House of Representatives, and not everyone is wanting to meet with you as an advocate, or you have to kind of learn your way around. And even if your congressperson does not care to listen or care to support what you're doing, you have to be persistent. Some people have congressmen that will sign on, be co-sponsors, and their job is a lot easier than those that are what I'd call in the trenches, where if you can move the needle half an inch, you've really succeeded. So I would just say, just remember how, or I would encourage you to pick up your pen or use your voice in the halls of Congress. It's so important.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. That is really exciting to hear your story with Bread for the World.
Nancy, I'm going to jump in real quick. I'm Connie Mixon. I'm a professor of political science and I direct our urban studies program. So this topic is something we deal a lot with in urban studies and political science. And I've heard you talk a lot about global hunger and national policy and lobbying members of Congress, but we know that a great deal of policy solutions that could address hunger are done at the local and state level. Mm-hmm. Things as simple as a zoning change can make a big difference in a neighborhood in Chicago. So I'm wondering what if anything, your organization does at the state and local level domestically?
Mm-hmm. A lot and a little in some ways. So we have groups, activists around the country who are part of various teams and various groups. And some of those groups are connected with, they're not just working on the federal issues that we're working on. So all of our research and our sort of national efforts, staff are focused on federal policy. But our organizers work with people, and we recognize that you know, people are real people and have, you know, care about lots of different things. And so we try to, there are sometimes we've tested some local support for programs, but like in Indianapolis or in Indiana, we have a BREAD, you know, board member extraordinaire and a really strong team in Indiana, and they have worked to try to figure out how to end hunger in Indiana. And so they've worked not just on the federal policy. They've worked with their senators. They've developed really strong relationships with their senators and a number of their members in the state. But they've also worked to really change what's happening locally. And they were actually counting, like, this many meals need to be distributed, and this, you know, they just were like kind of down to the nitty gritty, working on local and state and federal policy in terms of doing advocacy. And so all of that is important. It is really, really, really important to engage in your local politics and your state politics. But our work is predominantly focused on federal issues.
If I could make a comment.
Thank you.
Sorry. I wanted to comment. I have seen Bread for the World do more grassroots organizing through their organizers in states, which I think is a real plus. And here in California, just this past year, our Bread for the World worked with our state assembly and Senate to get passed with our governor to enable benefits to be ready for those who are being released from prison. Normally, these are benefits that come to them, but maybe a month or two later, after they've been able to sign up and wait for it, by that time, they could have been on the street and not living a very pleasant existence, or being able to go back with their families. They're just a burden on them. And now it means that they get these food benefits, these federal food policy benefits as soon as they're released, which is one of the ways to help on hunger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, South Carolina has a ban on SNAP for anyone who's served prison time in the for a felony. Yeah, I believe so. And so there's I think there's a lifetime ban. I think South Carolina is like one of the only states. And so there's been some effort to try to change that within South Carolina. A program like SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is a federal program, but it's implemented in each state, and each state implements in a different way and has different rules. So there's some flexibility there for states. But the federal sort of policy is outlined, and then certain states work within that. So so it's really exciting, the work that you all did in California to get benefits available to formerly incarcerated people before they leave, because then they're not like having to wonder where their next meal is coming from.
Nancy, I think one of the issues that I think college students struggle with is, you know, you're advocating on a national level to eradicate hunger, and sometimes that's overwhelming, right? And so sometimes, you know, kind of a stretch goal. You know, if we can make sure everybody at Elmhurst has a hot meal every night before they go to bed, and then everybody in the Chicagoland area, and then everybody in DuPage County, and then everybody in the state of Illinois, and so on until you get to the national level. And, you know, so I think sometimes where students can really be helpful is right in your own backyard. Is, you know, making sure people locally are taken care of. You know, we lost, a lot of our students lost employment because they work in the restaurant industry. You know, so when restaurants were closed down, they had trouble paying their rent and putting meal on their table. And so we need to make sure that our fellow Blue Jays are taken care of first and foremost. And then let it build from there. And so sometimes I think, you know, we can break it down for students. Do we need to be concerned at a national level? Absolutely. But to a college age freshman or a sophomore, that may be overwhelming. Like how can I do that? What can I do? So sometimes if we think in chunks, you know, once we take care of Elmhurst, then we'll take care of the city of Elmhurst, and then so on. And I think sometimes that's not a bad way to think about how to start tackling it. Or if you have a passion for helping others, it makes it a little more manageable.
Right. I would certainly say figuring out what the needs are in your community, in your immediate community, that may take you to federal advocacy immediately, but it might take you somewhere else. So following the needs of the community and letting the solutions that you find to those needs really guide your work makes a ton of sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I was just going to add that just thinking about students on campus and such, and of course I made a plea for becoming advocates. You might find out who are the representatives to Congress, where is the district office for Elmhurst, and maybe a few of the students would be interested in getting together and deciding to go visit their representative. I mean, they represent us. We are the constituents. So there is no reason that they can't give you some time. And I know people like Nancy who would be very happy to prep you, give you some talking points, all of that. And the first time you do this, it might be kind of scary, but it's really kind of fun. And you get to know your congressperson in a more familiar way. And so I add that as something students could be thinking about doing.
Perfect. Thank you.
We'll have a lobby day in June, the second Tuesday of June. We always have a national event. Normally we come together in Washington, D.C. and invite people to join us, but it will be virtual this year. It's always free, just about always free, but this year it's virtual. And so would invite you, if you're interested, to join that. There will be some conversations within regions. There'll be some conversations across different groups. So there's probably a student conversation that will happen. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to share more about it with you individually.
So Nancy, it looks like we've got one more question. Are books by Marion Nestle good resources for this topic? Food, politics, etc.
I am not familiar with Marion Nestle. So I can't really say. I can't really speak to that question.
Okay. Well, it looks like we got just about a minute or two left. Does anybody have any final questions or comments they'd like to make? If not, Nancy, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon and bringing attention to world hunger and what's happening in our own backyards. And so I know Scott would very much wish he was here today. He'll be back up on his feet tomorrow. And then both of us look forward to seeing you hopefully this fall in DC again, once we can start traveling again. So again, thank you very much on behalf of Elmhurst University. We really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here with you all.
Yes,
Thanks, everyone.